In this lesson, we're going to break down easements, profits, and licenses. So big picture, the easement is a non-possessory right to use land in the possession of another. Right, so important to recognize from the top, right, that the easement is an interest in real property, right? So if we're conveying an easement to a party, right, that does, if we're trying to do it expressly, it triggers the statute of frauds because we're conveying an interest in real property. But important to recognize that it's a non-possessory interest, right? It's a non-possessory right to use the land in possession of another. If you think back to our discussion of present estates, right, freehold and non-freehold estates, we said those were possessory interests, possessory estates, where the holder of that possessory interest or that possessory estate could freely use and enjoy the land, right? There wasn't a lot of scope of limitation to their use and enjoyment. They have possessory rights to use and enjoy the land, right? The easement is much more narrow in scope, right? It still creates an interest in real property, right? So if we're doing it expressly, we know it triggers the statute of frauds, but it's a non-possessory right to use land in possession of another. So it is distinguished from our freehold and non-freehold present estates, right? Remember the life estate, the fee simple estate, right? All of our non-freehold estates, the tenancy for years, the tenancy at will, the periodic tenancy, all of these estates are possessory interests in real property, right? The easement is a non-possessory interest in real property, and it's really limited, right? It's the right to use land in the possession of another. Usually what we think about most classically, right, you're just crossing somebody's land to get access to something, usually a road, right? That's what this is kind of illustrating, right? This guy who owns parcel B might want to use parcel A to get to this road, to get access to this road. Parcel B, right, the guy who lives at parcel B might want to cross parcel A's land to get access to this road. That's kind of the classic easement, right? What we might call an access easement. It's a non-possessory right to use the land in possession of another, right? It's not giving you a possessory interest. You can't just go onto parcel A's land and use and enjoy the land however you want. It's much more limited, right? It's a non-possessory right to use the land in possession of another for usually a really narrow purpose, right? To get access to this road or whatever that purpose is, right? So if you're thinking about this in terms of kind of like a hierarchy, right? At the top, we might have present estates that actually do convey possessory interest in the property, right? This would be like the life estate, fee simple, all of our non-freehold estates in landlord-tenant law, right? Tenancy for years, tenancy at will, the periodic tenancy, all of those would be possessory interests to use and enjoy the land, right? Below that, we have the easement, which is still a real property interest, which can trigger the statute of frauds. If we're trying to convey an easement expressly, we know it has to be in writing, has to satisfy some formality requirements, right? Because it's still conveying an interest in real property, but it's a non-possessory interest. It's a non-possessory right to use the land for a more limited purpose, right? Usually to get access to something like a road. Right, and so below the easement, so if the easement's kind of in the middle, right, so at the top of our hierarchy we have like present estates, right, possessory interest in real property, then we have non-possessory rights to use the land. This would be like the easement. Below that, it would be the license, right? A license is an informal, usually revocable permission to use the land of another for a really narrow purpose, right? The key distinction between the license and the easement is that the license doesn't convey an actual interest in real property. It can be very informal, it's usually revocable, right? It can be done orally, and probably most of us use licenses, engage in licenses on a daily basis, right? Every time you go into a store, right? That store is giving you a license to come onto their land and use it for a narrow purpose, right? A revocable permission to come onto their land and maybe, right, shop for goods, purchase goods, right? That would be a license. They're not actually conveying an interest in real property to every patron that comes into their store, right? They're just giving them permission, a temporary license informally to come into their store for a very narrow scope. scope, right, to shop and purchase goods, right? So at the low end, we have the license, right? It's just an informal permission. It does not trigger the statute of frauds. It can be granted orally or implicitly, right? You put an open sign on the store, right, that implicitly grants a license to passerbys to come into your store to shop for goods. Right, above that would be the easement, where we actually are conveying an interest in real property, so that triggers the statute of frauds. We have all the formality requirements that are involved in doing that, right? So that's still, though, non-possessory as an interest. Above that, we would have like present estates, which are actual possessory interests in real property, right? So that's kind of our hierarchy. And the profit falls in the middle. It operates like an easement, right? A profit is the right to enter the land of another, similar to the easement, but the difference is once you're on the land, you can remove natural resources, things like timber, oil, gas, minerals, right? Whatever you're removing. So the profit operates very similarly to the easement. The main difference is a profit gives you a little bit more of a right, because it's a little bit broader in scope because it's actually letting you remove physical substances from the land, where an easement, usually you're not going to have the right to actually remove anything from the land. Right, so that's the difference between the easement and the profit, but otherwise they actually operate very similarly. But for our purposes in this lesson, we're really going to focus on the easement, right? Because this is what we're going to see most often tested in real property, but we want to be aware of the profit. We want to be aware of easements, profits, and licenses, right, as rights in land, okay? But with that, we can jump right into the easement, right? And we'll circle back to the licenses. We'll see that in some situations, right, the license can actually become irrevocable, right, which effectively creates an easement. So we'll talk about how that happens, right? We're going to circle back and flesh all of these concepts out in more detail. I just want to kind of give a big picture first. With that, we can jump into the easement, right? So again, an easement is a non-possessory right to use land in the possession of another. So step one, we do have some terminology we want to define that will become important as we work through some examples. Right, we have this idea of the dominant land and the servient land. Sometimes you hear this referred to as the dominant estate or the servient estate. I'm going to call it dominant land and servient land. That's just how I think of it in my head, but either way, it's the same thing. Right, so the dominant land refers to the land that is benefited by the easement. The servient land refers to the land that is burdened by the easement. So in this illustration right here, right, parcel B would have the benefit of the easement. So we'd say parcel B is the dominant land. Parcel A is burdened by the easement, right? So we'd say parcel A is the servient land, right? Because parcel B gets to cross parcel A to get to the road, right? So parcel B has the benefit of crossing parcel A. Parcel A has the burden of parcel B crossing to get to the road. So parcel B is our dominant land, parcel A is our servient land, right? Pretty straightforward. Also, we have this distinction between easements appurtenant and easements in gross. Right, an easement appurtenant benefits the holder as the owner of the dominant land. An easement in gross is personal to the holder. It benefits the holder whether or not he owns any other parcels of land. Right, so with easements in gross, really no dominant land exists. And the reason the distinction is important is because with an easement appurtenant, right, the easement actually attaches to the land. So if that land transfers, right, parcel B, this is an easement appurtenant. So if parcel B, the owner of parcel B, transfers parcel B to somebody else, they convey the property, that easement has attached to the land. It'll go with the conveyance, right? It attaches to it. So that new owner gets the easement, right? An easement in gross does not attach to the land. It's personal to the holder, right? So if you have an easement in gross, it does not attach to the land, right? But more frequently, you're going to see the easement appurtenant, right? This is an easement that benefits the holder as the owner of the dominant land, right? In other words, here, if we look at this example, the only person that can benefit from this easement, right, to cross parcel A to get to this road is the owner of parcel B. No one else can benefit by this. You have to be the owner of this dominant land to get the benefit of crossing parcel A to get to this road. Right? An easement in gross is the opposite, right? It's personal to the holder. There is no dominant land, right? It benefits the holder whether or not he owns any other parcels of land. Imagine that there were just, right, power lines crossing across parcel A, right? An electric company owns power lines that go across parcel A, right? Well, it doesn't matter whether or not that power line company has any parcels of land around here, right? It just benefits them as the holder of the easement. Having those power lines go across parcel A is personal to that power line company. It's not going to attach to any land because there is no dominant land, right? The power company could be way over here, right? And it's got these power lines crossing all these people's land, right? There is no dominant land there, right? The power line company just has a personal benefit of these power lines crossing people's land, right? There is no dominant land. Whereas with something like this, we clearly have dominant land, servient land, and the only person who can benefit from this easement is the owner of the dominant land. So that would be an easement appurtenant, right? So that attaches to parcel B. Whoever gets parcel B, whoever the owner is going to receive that easement, right? An easement in gross would just be like the power lines crossing through land. There is no dominant adjacent land, right? The power line company could be way down here off the map. It doesn't matter. There is no dominant land, right? It benefits the power line company whether or not that power line company owns any other land, right? It's a personal benefit to the power line company, so it doesn't attach to any land, right? That's the difference between the easement appurtenant and the easement in gross. All right, with that we can jump into express easements. We'll see that easements can be created expressly or implicitly in certain situations, right? Now remember, we said that the conveyance of an easement is the conveyance of an interest in real property. We know conveyances or transfers of interest in real property trigger the statute of frauds. So to expressly create an easement, right, it's going to have to satisfy the statute of frauds. We probably are very familiar at this point with what the statute of frauds requirements are, but we'll run through them in terms of an easement, right? So the express easement is voluntarily created by a written instrument. Usually this would probably be a deed, but any written instrument, right? A deed or a will is what you might most commonly see, but it could be any written instrument, right? And that written instrument must be in writing, number one, has to be signed by the grantor, it has to identify the grantor and grantee, it has to contain words that manifest intent to create an easement, and it has to describe the affected land. Right, so most of these elements, right, if you see an express easement being tested, are going to be very binary. The facts are either going to give it to you or not. Either you're going to have a writing or you're not. Either the writing is going to be signed by the grantor or it's not. It's either going to identify the grantor or grantee or it's not. It's either going to describe the affected land or it's not. That's all given to you in the fact pattern. You just want to look for it. Right? This third element's the only one that has maybe a little bit of nuance, right? The written instrument has to contain words that manifest intent to create an easement. Right? So we want to see language that looks formal, like we're actually trying to convey an interest in real property. If you see something really informal, it might satisfy these other elements, but it's not going to contain words that actually manifest intent to create an easement. Right? Imagine you see a note signed by a neighbor that says something like, hey, your son left a toy over at my house last weekend. Feel free to come by my house, let yourself in through the back door and retrieve the toy anytime you want. Right? Well, that would satisfy a lot of these elements, right? It's in writing, it could be signed by the grantor, it identifies both parties, and it describes the affected land. The problem is it doesn't contain words that manifest intent to create an easement, right? That's more like a license. It's very informal, very narrow in scope, right? We're not actually trying to convey an interest in the property to this grantee, right? The person who wrote that note is just saying, hey, look, if you got some spare time, you can come by and retrieve your toy. You can come onto my property temporarily to get that, right? That's much more of a license, right? That doesn't actually contain words that manifest intent to create an easement, right? To create an interest in real property. We need to see language that's like look, we're trying, like ideally you'd want to see the word easement in the language, right? I'm granting you an easement to use the land to do this task, right? That's the language we're looking for, not, hey, you can swing by my house and retrieve your kid's toy, right? That's not going to create an easement. Right, but otherwise, if these elements are satisfied, right, it's in writing, it's signed by the grantor, it identifies the grantor and grantee, it contains words that manifest intent to create an easement, and it describes the affected land, okay, you have an express easement. Right, but what about oral easements, right? Somebody says orally, you might see this on a fact pattern, hey, I'm granting you an easement to use my land to cross my property to get access to this road. I plan on letting you have this easement for the next 5 years, whatever, right? They orally state everything. So it doesn't satisfy the statute of frauds, but of course that other side relies on that to their detriment. We'll see if these elements are satisfied, we can actually have an irrevocable license, right? Because we know orally, remember at the start of this lesson, we said, hey, look, licenses can be done orally. They're very informal. So if we start with a revocable license, right, an oral license, we'll see if certain detrimental reliance elements are satisfied, that license can actually become irrevocable. So our three elements we'd really be looking for is number one, that a license was actually granted. Remember, this could be oral, right? The requirements for a license are much lower. So we could have an oral license is granted. The licensee spends substantial money or labor in good faith reliance on the license not being revoked, right? So we'd want to see something that the licensor says, right, when that license is granted, right? We'd want to see the licensor give some indication that it's not going to be revoked anytime soon. Like, hey, you can use this property to cross at this point to get access to this road. As long as I'm the owner of this property, right, you can do this and that with the property. We'd want to see something that makes it a good faith reliance on the license not being revoked, right? So, of course, say the licensee then goes out and spends a lot of money or labor to do something, right? Say, a person says, hey, look, you can come fishing in my pond anytime you want. You can come use my lake. You can come across my property and use my lake anytime you want to go boating or to fish, whatever, right? So we're granting a license. This is all orally, right? And then imagine, though, that other person, the neighbor, goes and builds a bridge, that costs $10,000 to get access to this pond or this lake, right? Well, now that licensee, right, has spent substantial money and labor in good faith reliance on that license not being revoked, right? They're not going to spend $10,000 on this bridge to get to the lake if they think it's going to be revoked, right? And then finally, we need the licensor to have known or should have known that the reliance would occur. So we look for some sort of response from the licensee, right? Maybe this oral license is granted, right? The licensor says something like, hey, you can use my pond anytime you want. As long as I live here, you're always free to come back and use my pond, my lake, whatever, for fishing or boating. We'd love to just have you use it whenever you want. Right? Say that then the licensee responds, great, I'm going to go ahead then and build this bridge. It's going to cost a lot of money to go and use your lake. And the licensor says, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Right? Well, then we could say, okay, well, the licensor knew that reliance would occur because that was indicated to the licensor. Right? So if all three of those elements are met, we would have that license, right? The original oral license, we would say, becomes irrevocable, right? At that point, once that detrimental reliance has occurred, the licensor is going to be estopped from revoking that license, right, in terms of equity. That's why we sometimes call this equitable estoppel, right, because they're now going to be estopped from revoking that license, right? So in effect, this is now an easement by estoppel, right, because the licensor is estopped from revoking the license. You now have an irrevocable license, so essentially it's an easement by estoppel if those three elements are satisfied, right? This would be your classic detrimental reliance, equitable estoppel, right, exception to the statute of frauds requirements, but this is how it plays out in terms of the easement, right? So you'd want to look for an oral grant of a license, or Even that fact pattern where we have the note, right? Hey, feel free to come by and pick up your kid's toy. Imagine the note says something like, hey, we loved having you over at the barbecue last week. Anytime you want to come and use our lake for boating or fishing, whatever you want, feel free to do it. We'd love to have you anytime you want. You can come by and use all that's written in the note. Right, well, it's probably still not an easement because they're not manifesting intent to create an easement. It doesn't rise to the level of manifesting an actual, express easement to create an interest in real property. But that still would be granting a license in written form. It just doesn't satisfy this third element. So if the other two are met, right, the licensee goes out and builds the bridge, spends lots of money to do that, and the licensor knew or should have known that this guy was going to go out and build the bridge and spend all the money to do that, then we could have that license, that little note, right, that granted the license, could become irrevocable, essentially stopping the licensor from revoking the license, which we would then say is really easement by estoppel. Okay, so two main situations we'd look out for, maybe like the informal note that somebody relies on to their detriment, or an oral license is granted and somebody relies on that to their detriment. That's what we're thinking about with easement by estoppel. Right, so that's the express easement and easement by estoppel. From there we can move on to the implied easement. We'll see we really have like three different types of the implied easement. Thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.